Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about how I believe the zodiac sign Gemini manipulates you. And yes, this does apply and pertain to the sun, moon, and ascendant. Anyway, well, first off, Gemini may simply manipulate others through the sheer art of what I call trickeration. It's through trickery. Gemini could be very shrewd and cunning, and sometimes you may not even know what happened until well after it's transpired. All of a sudden, you feel your tire is leaking, and or something's happened else that's happened, and your car's bouncing up and down or something. And I mean, and it just what it is Gemini. What they do is they have such a quicksilver mentality. They will do things so fast, so quickly in a heartbeat. You'll be you'll be unaware of what's happened. You could be standing, all of a sudden you feel a little buzz or something hit you, and you're looking around saying, what's happened? How did this happen? I mean, I'm using kind of a isolated example, very arbitrary, but you understand what I'm saying. What it is, Gemini is being notorious, I should say, for having many tricks up their sleeves. Sometimes literally, maybe in some cases. I could remember, you have, like, I talk about the art of trickeration. Some things come to mind. A Gemini rising shock jock, Howard Stern. I mean, he had some episode I saw on Howard Stern show one time, and he had like it was like a trick scale that was like built into the ground or something, and people would just be inadvertently weighing themselves on it. Now, I don't know if Howard Stern actually designed it, but the fact that he was even affiliated with something like this, whether this was his idea or not, or if he collaborated on it with someone else, but or whether it wasn't, but the fact that he was connected with it. Gemini is about all this trickeration, and really, the thing too is that Gemini also can manipulate others through their strong powers of persuasion. They can outtalk the best of them. It's the way they manipulate their words sometimes. Gemini can, of all the zodiac signs, they have the best chance of selling an igloo to an Eskimo. I mean, that might be a little overboard, but probably not much of a distortion. Now, Gemini may often get you to play some kind of activity with them that they know they could conquer you at. It's not for the sheer winning and emerging victorious like Leo, but it's about because Gemini would like to beat people in something that requires some shrewdness or some mental agility. It could be a game of haiku or chess or Tetris, something that, or playing Mastermind, something that could really, where they feel that there's something mentally challenging that they could beat you. They like to be the ones that are superior intellectually, and they often will cajole you, I believe, to get you to play those kind of games that they're going to be triumphant in. Now, keep in mind that the zodiac sign Leo often falls on the third house cusp in a solar or natal chart for Gemini. Gemini may have this propensity to mentally dominate somebody. They like to be the king of conversations. They will often draw you, I believe, into conversations that they know that they will be superior in. They may even talk over some people if they feel maybe if somebody else is challenging them on an intellectual or mental level. And however they do it, they may either, in some cases, a very negative Gemini might try to drown you out of a conversation if they feel that he or she is showing some kind of superiority intellectually on a certain subject. Now, the thing about this too is there are, I've had some, experiences with, Gemini rising people that really, when they are ones that always, more so than the other zodiac signs on average, have the ability to outmaneuver, outwit, and smart others. I can remember playing. It was kind of an odd kind of game I was playing with a Gemini moon and rising friend, one time, and it was something where we'd be riding our bicycles, right? And what would happen is the way the game, the concept of the game, I guess you could say, is that one person riding the bicycle would be chasing the other one on the bicycle, and one would have to hit one's back tire with one's front tire. And for whatever reason, I was never able to get him, this Gemini moon rising person. They are, I mean, Gemini rising and Gemini, well, Gemini in general can be very hard to pin down, whether it's on a mental, physical level or what have you. It's more mentally than anything, but it can be, they are hard to capture and get or pin down, and it could be in both, ways, the physical and mental, even though it's more on a mental level with Gemini. But the point being is they have that ability to be very sly, and they will find these games they could play that they feel that they're going to defeat you at. Now, the thing about it is too, we're going to another Gemini rising person. Some of you may have heard of the former NFL coach Jeff Fisher, who has Gemini rising. I think he epitomizes Gemini energy because of his ability to outmaneuver and outwit others. Now, through his shrewd cunning and quick-wittedness. Now, some of you may have remembered there was a game in, I believe, 2006 that took place against the Titans and Colts, and he was the head coach of the Tennessee Titans at the time. And what happened was, what Jeff Fisher did, and I don't know if it might have been some of the other coaches might have collaborated with him, but I'm sure he was at least part of this idea. What happened was the Titans started running, players started running on and off the field, and they were called, all this chaos and confusion was going on. And because of that, it tricked the Colts into calling a timeout. Well, you're thinking, well, how is that significant? How could have that impacted the outcome of the game that much? Well, what it does is, for those of you that follow the NFL and pro football or what have you, understand that it's important if you're in a competitive game, especially, to conserve your timeouts if possible. When the Colts used that timeout, they had one less to use, perhaps at a critical juncture of the game, say toward the end, when they may have actually needed it more. And they actually, Jeff Fisher and company, tricked the Colts into calling that timeout. Ultimately, the Titans actually won that game and emerged victorious, and that might have played a little bit of a role in it. But the thing about it is, Gemini, it's very hard to outsmart Gemini because they are often one step ahead of you. They will think of these things that you can't even imagine. And you witness it from them. You actually can learn so much from them because of these things that they do that outsmart others. Gemini will hide something in an appliance or even maybe even sometimes an appliance in an appliance. They will just do these things that you would just never even think of or fathom. That these are things, this is why it makes it very difficult to out-manipulate any kind of, any Gemini person. Now, the thing about this too, there is another thing, and sometimes Gemini will manipulate others, I believe, by bringing you perhaps into a conversation that you may know little or nothing about, just to mentally demoralize you. I can remember talking to some Gemini rising friend one time, and this wasn't done for that reason, but anyway, he was talking about some new, I guess, product or something, and I was inquiring about it, and he said, "Ed, it's new. Why shouldn't, I should have just automatically known what he was talking about or something." And basically, Gemini will often too, you have to understand about Gemini, they won't respect. I mean, in a lot of cases they would really want you to be intellectually competitive with them, but if you're not, they may not respect you. Now, it's also important to look at the house cusp Scorpio falls on in a chart, because that could be the area or sector in life where one may be proficient, most proficient in that art of manipulation. Now, Scorpio often falls on the 6th house cusp in a solar or natal chart for Gemini. Now, the late actor Burt Reynolds didn't have Scorpio on his 6th house cusp. He has a Gemini rising, but he has Scorpio intercepted in his 6th house. Hold on a moment, people. Anyway, the thing about this is with as an example, I remember in one movie I saw with Burt Reynolds was in, he did something to someone's vehicle so the person was going to be out of commission, the person would not be able to drive it. What happens is he winds up offering, when he sees the person, offers the person to help him or her in terms of fixing the vehicle, and he got paid for it. I mean, this is an example of using, Gemini could be very proficient in manipulation in terms of service rendered. And as I've talked about previously, I do believe, I understand this was in a movie, but I've talked about previously, and I'll say it again, that I do believe strongly that actors and actresses can be consciously, if not subconsciously, be drawn to roles that correspond with their astrological energies. And I think in this case, Gemini rising actor Burt Reynolds was certainly no exception. And also because Scorpio often does fall on the 6th house cusp in a solar or natal chart for Gemini, they could often incorporate those qualities, manipulative qualities, into their daily routine more so than most. Now, it's also important to look at the house cusp that Pisces falls on in a solar natal chart, as this could indicate the sector in life where one could be most deceptive and duplicitous, and of course this could be tied into manipulative behavior as well. Now, Pisces often falls on the 10th house cusp in a solar or natal chart for Gemini. Gemini sadly can sometimes have that reputation for being deceptive. The way this manifests with Gemini is that Gemini may be able to pull the wool, so to speak, over authority figures very easily. Gemini can be very flippant, humorous, and witty, and the fact that they're very versatile and multifaceted. Now, this can really entice prospective employers. Now, what happens is, as a result, is that Gemini, after a certain time, after a certain tenure with their company and working under somebody, they may capitalize this and really win the superiors over, and then maybe perhaps they might become a little bit more lackadaisical and apathetic regarding career matters, which is tied into that Pisces on that 10th house cusp, I believe. Now, or often falling on the 10th house cusp in a solar or natal chart for Gemini. However, in some cases, this could work against Gemini, and on occasion, they may outsmart themselves, and depending on their tenure with the company, because ultimately and inevitably, they might wind up getting themselves terminated because of this, because Gemini, as smart as they can be, they're certainly not impervious to losing their position. But the thing about Gemini as well, the fact that they're so, there's so much about going from one position to another, it might not really affect them as much as it would most people. Now, and also too, I think this manifests in self-deception in career matters, because Gemini, they may actually have the intention in some cases of having certain persistence at something that's career related, but because of their restlessness and their aversion to monotony, they may simply dissipate themselves through lack of an integrating purpose. So anyway, those are some things to look at. And I thought it was funny. I want to talk about another thing. And the thing about, Gemini too, the way they are too is that they might inadvertently and unwittingly manipulate a person in a way, not necessarily maliciously, but because what happens with Gemini, they're kind of that will-o'-the-wisp type people. They could be, with Geminis, it's funny, you could be in what appears to be a very constant, persistent connection with them for a certain amount of time. And what happens is, You become relaxed, you become complacent with the connection, you start taking the situation or scenario with them for granted, you think everything's okay, this is going to be fairly stable, and all of a sudden out of the blue they might kind of taper off and they kind of dissipate into thin air for a little bit, and they are just really, it becomes, you start to realize and be cognizant of the fact it becomes more of an intermittent connection, kind of like internet connections at cheap motels, right? Or cheap hotel. But anyway, um, you understand what I'm saying. So what happens is, well, the way this is about works out as far as manipulation goes, is that they might not maliciously be trying to manipulate someone in that manner, but what happens is they ultimately, Gemini, can, because they get others to think that they might have a stable connection with them, then all of a sudden they just kind of gradually will often just taper off, or just might, or they might just inexplicably disappear for a certain period of time, and you might not even hear from them. They don't feel like they're being cold or callous or rude, but that is just what Gemini will often do. They'll just kind of take off on you for a little bit, and then they'll come back sometimes at their convenience and then reconnect with you, so to speak. Well, another thing I wanted to talk about, and going a little backtrack here, about how actors and actresses, I use Burt Reynolds as one example, but I want to use another example of how actors and actresses can be consciously, if not subconsciously, I believe, drawn to roles in scenes that may correspond with their astrological energies. Now, Gemini rising actor Peter Fonda is certainly no exception. Now, he was in a movie, I believe it was entitled Race with the Devil. I think it was about these KKK people chasing him and his whatever, his friends with him or whatever they were throughout the movie, and Peter Fonda had to keep outwitting and outmaneuvering them, which is such, I mean, I think he's projecting a lot of Gemini rising qualities in that movie. There was one scene that's very memorable, and I don't, this one I won't forget. There was one scene in that movie where what happened was one of those people that were chasing Peter Fonda and his friends or whatever during the movie, they got on, I guess it was his, it was like a camper or trailer. It was a vehicle that Peter Fonda was in. So what happened was he winds up crawling out of the vehicle. He gets onto the top of the vehicle with this guy, and he's looking at him face to face. And what Peter Fonda said to him was, he just said, he looked at the guy and said, hey. And when he said hey to the guy's head moved up a little bit, and it was just enough where what happened was he timed it right, where when the guy moved his head up, it wound up hitting like a bridge or a viaduct in the process, and it knocked the guy off that camper or whatever it was, that vehicle he was on. And that was just a classic example, I think, of this Gemini rising energy being projected, because it's that art of trickeration, it's that art of outmaneuvering and outsmarting the adversary by doing something tricky like that. And I think it came out in that movie, and actually, I mean, that scene and other scenes as well, if you ever see that movie. I believe the title of it was Race with the Devil, and Peter Fonda was in it. It came out in like 1975, I believe, but that's a very, very interesting movie, and you could see his how his Gemini Ascendant energy was coming out. I felt projected very strongly in those a lot of those scenes in that movie. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment and how I believe Gemini manipulates you, and or how they're able to. Now, anyway, people, stay tuned next time, where I'll be talking about how I believe the zodiac sign Cancer can manipulate others and manipulate you, what have you. Two things I want to get with you on before I head out. Firstly, the stars may impel but do not compel. And secondly, never isolate any single astrological element, aspect, planetary placement, position, configuration, influence, or what have you, and make an analysis of a person, astrologically speaking, based on this alone, because astrologically speaking, the person is the sum of all their components in their natal chart and not just one. Until next time, people, stay well.